Jeff, welcome to the podcast. It's really good to be able to connect.
Thank you. Nice to speak with you, Alex. Yes, it's quite an honour for me to talk with you because so many people try and move away from what I do because it's sort of an innovation and quite surprisingly, a couple of weeks ago I was at a medical conference with functional medicine people. And a guy came up and started talking, and he introduced himself as a professor at a medical university and said he heard me speak and he said he'd never heard anything like it, wants me to go there. So anyway, it was,
Wow.
so thank you for the invitation. And yes, my name's Jeff Charlton. My company is called Building Forensics. Um, I'm afraid I've been in this industry for about 40 years, and I first started learning in Scandinavia, and I worked in Malmo and Gothenburg. With the Benelux countries seem to be in the forefront of healthy homes, and they taught me about bacteria, about mould, about particulate matter, and I started to study it. And but more importantly, at the time, I learned about disaster recovery, which was post fires, post floods, where buildings started to decay very quickly from corrosion or moisture. So I learned, it was like so far in front of everything that was in Europe, it was unbelievable. So I did that and I worked out there for about a year, maybe 2 years in all. And then we came up to the Gulf War and I decided that I could go out to Kuwait. This was, I think it was 89. And I got to Kuwait and I started to do remediation of some of the big hotels that were pretty much vandalized by the Iraqis. And they set light to them and they flooded and so on and so forth. And I started to work out there. I had about 400 people working for me at the time, and they were all Filipinos and Indian people. I'm afraid they were sort of slave labour, but I didn't know that at the time. And from there, the US Corps of Engineers, the American government, the Army, saw what I was doing with some pretty novel techniques. And they asked me to write a scope of work for the restoration of Kuwait, which I did. And I presented it to the American contractors who they flew over. But what was interesting is the American contractors recognised that I had skill sets that weren't available in America either. And they invited me to America to train their guys. And I did. But what was interesting, when I was there, they were already starting to do mould and biological investigations. And it started to become the mantra of mould is gold. And there were lawsuits going on for $50 million, $60 million, and people like Erin Brockovich, who after she did her big court case, bought a beautiful home for $20 million and then found that they all got sick. So she went after them and it just snowballed to the point where American insurers now refuse to insure for mould.
Oh, wow.
So I started to learn with the Americans and I brought things to the table that they hadn't seen. And it ended up where I started to work with the leading doctors in America, Dr. Schumacher, Dr. Scott McMahon, and they developed the assessments of chronic inflammatory response syndrome, where they realised that certain inflammagens that you'll find in a water damaged building, and we all thought at the time it was mould, would cause the irritable bowel syndrome, the brain fogs, the genetic differences and changes that people were getting. And everybody started to study it more, and lots of research. There's about 1,000 peer-reviewed papers now on this illness issue. So that was me. I learned with them, and they helped me along my road of, they assisted me. I wrote 2 peer-reviewed papers with Dr. Schumacher, and we started to realise there was over 30 contaminants in a home that can cause inflammatory response. And The World Health Organization, for example, have said that mold is the great masquerade of the 21st century. And what they're getting at there was that so many illnesses are misdiagnosed. And mold, you know, people say, oh, you've got Lyme disease. When it isn't Lyme disease, it's a mold reaction. And talking of mold reaction, you know, I think it was just as we was approaching COVID, I was still working, and, you know, I was going into homes, and, you know, this is where it started to take off in the UK, by the way, because people were confined to home and then they started to feel sick. And what I believe happened was that people started to Google, and all of a sudden, whereas before COVID, I'd walk into a home and say, I think you might have mold, and I mention a species, and they say, what's a species? What's a genus? What's it? What? No, nobody knew anything. And suddenly when I walked in after COVID, people would say, what species are you going to analyse for? Are you going to use DNA, PCR? Are you going to do an HERTSMI test? And I was just gobsmacked that suddenly the British public was really up to speed, because there's so many discussion groups in the US that people, and of course, it's aggravating for doctors, because people, I suspect, was going into surgery and saying, I've got SIRS, I've got mold illness, and nobody would take any notice of them. And it affected me personally, where I was doing a job at Tower Bridge. It was a block of new flats, and they'd had a water leak. The water had gone under the floorboards, and this is a laminate floor. And I said, the floor's got to come up. And I put a team of 3 or 4 guys in there, put the flat under negative pressure, put critical barriers up and engineering controls in. And I was passing the job, and I thought I'll just pop in and have a look, make sure everybody's safe and that the job's going okay. And I didn't bother putting on PPE. Well, within about, I was only there about 15 minutes, but within those 15 minutes, I went outside. It was January and snowing, and I went outside and stripped off because I couldn't control my temperature, and I didn't know what I was doing. And somebody called an ambulance, and I went to Princess Louise Hospital in Bromley Way. It's going out towards just outside Chislehurst. And they looked at me, and I had a blanket on, and I walked in, and then the ambulance man said, we've tried to take his pulse and he hasn't got a heartbeat. So they went and got an ECG machine, and this must be registered with the NHS, and you're free to, I'll give you permission to look if anybody wants it. But they've got an ECG cart, and they did an ECG, and it didn't register. And they said, oh, the machine's broke. So they went and got a second ECG, and they put it on me, and that didn't work either. So they went and got the crash trolley, which had the latest equipment on. And I said, why don't you just listen to my heart with a stethoscope? Because I think you'll find it stopped, because I could feel it stop. And they listened. The doctor that was on duty in the emergency room listened, and he just went, he pushed a button, he said, intensive care. And they took me to intensive care, and I walked into intensive care, and the nurses were saying, where's the patient? And the nurses were saying, it's him. So they put me on a bed, and they wired me up. And I don't know what happened, but the NHS, I don't know if they got a central information centre, but 2 hours later, a doctor walked in, and he said, I've come from London, I'm a heart specialist, and I've been notified that they've got a patient that hasn't got a heartbeat and he's not in pain. So he sat on my bed, and he was talking to me, and I'm talking to him as I'm talking to you. And he said, and he laughed, he said, this can't happen, can it? I said, no. And then after a minute or two, I said, it stopped. And then he got his stethoscope out, and his jaw dropped, and he looked at me and he said, what, no pain? I said, no. And then he heard it start again. I said, there it goes, it starts. Well, he didn't believe it. He was incredulous. And I've had this happen to me twice. I was in Spain and I saw a top heart specialist in Madrid where I didn't feel well. And I'm not saying I was sick, but I knew there was something wrong. And they said exactly that. And the doctor in Spain said, and this guy said, you could live 5 minutes or 50 years. We don't know. I've never seen anything like it. Now, here's the issue. I'm quite aware of these things because I've seen it and records of it. So I'm a little bit aware of it. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what's going on. I now carry a cardia and use it with my phone, and I go into arrhythmia quite regularly. I go into tachycardia quite regularly. Yesterday I went into the one with B, where my heart rate went down to 57 or something like that, and then a little red light come on, and brachycardia, and I don't know what's going on, but I'm now on amphetamines as well, and I didn't drink enough water, so maybe that's, I don't know, related, I don't know. But all I'm saying is there are issues going on that people don't really realise. And what I do now know, Dr. Schumacher, when I told him about the event, he said to me, I want you to buy a 24-hour heart monitor and I'll analyse it for you, because he already knew that this is happening, that I think what it is, one of the symptoms of mould exposure in some people is they get a lot of electric shocks. Because I believe that their salt goes to the surface of their skin and they become very conductive, superconductive. And some of the functional medicine people will tell you to walk about without shoes on so that you ground yourself. So there is an electrical activity, and maybe it starts to become, maybe the heart's still beating, but the electrical energy is so low that the equipment can't detect it. So that's my only thought. So, and I worked at St George's Hospital in the physics department in 1968, 69, 70, 71. Working with, we developed the pacemaker there. So I know just a tiny bit. I'm not expert, just nuts and bolts. Yeah. And so anyway, that's me. That's me. And I went to my doctor with this, and I was going to get onto the thing you mentioned about NHS, and we was talking about NHS. And what happened was I got to a point where I couldn't get out of a chair, and I had to drop onto the floor and use my elbows and everything to try and get up and try and walk. And then my words started to come out back to front, and I was talking back to front, and my son, who was 45 at the time, and I'd gone to a party just very quietly, just sat in a corner, and someone said something to me, and I went, and my son said, Dad, why don't you go home? You're an embarrassment, because they thought I was drunk, but I hadn't had a drink. So I got the kicking from the family, as I now know that all of my clients do. And as I go out and do surveys, I walk into at least one divorce a week, where the wife is sick and the husband isn't, or vice versa.
Yeah.
We now know that there are the HLA gene, people that are hypermobile, for example, have got a lack of collagen, they're very susceptible to mould, and they can't clear it from their bodies. So if you've got HLA, I think it's A and D, you're very susceptible to storing mycotoxins and inflammagens, and you need a little bit of help with something like cholestyramine or a binder to get it out of your body. So I went to my doctor, and I thought he was writing me a prescription, because I can't go to my doctors in America. I'm local, what am I going to do? So I went to my doctor and I said, look, I'm struggling. I can't talk. I can't walk. What is it? And he wrote something. And when I looked at it, I said, what is this? He said, it's a book, How to Improve Your Self-Image and Improve Your Confidence. Well, I could have punched him, because he thought it was a psychological issue.
Yeah.
wasn't. But he prescribed prednisone, and he prescribed it. He didn't. He sent me for a blood test, and I got a phone call from him, and he said on the phone call, he said, "I don't care where you are. I need to know where you are, and I will send a prescription to the local chemist. You need to get prednisone immediately, and you need to take 60 milligrams immediately because you've got a chance of going blind overnight." So I got the prednisone, and I looked it up, and I thought, I've seen this. I've seen what it does to people. I said, and I ignored his advice, and I thought, I will know if I'm going blind. And I had the tablets in my hand, and I just stayed awake and thought I'll just keep drinking water or something. Anyway, it went on, and I didn't get any better. And after about a week, I took one tablet, and I swear I could have run a marathon. One tablet. But the next thing I had was anaphylactic shock, and I had it 3 times. And I walked into a hospital. I was actually having a few days in Spain. I walked into a private hospital in Malaga. And I had my credit card in one hand, and I was trying to hold my tongue with the other hand, where my face had just swollen like that. And they didn't even take the credit card. They just saw exactly what it was. And anyway, it turns out I said to the doctor, I've developed anaphylaxis. I don't know why. I've never had it. And it's not peanuts, fish. It's just, anyway, they sent me to, again, University College London, or it might have been Guy's. And I did the rash test and the skin allergy test. And the doctor said to me, "You haven't got an allergy to mould." And I looked at him and I said, "But this isn't this, you're using sterile aspergillus. You're not using aspergillus species that's been battling Stachybotrys and penicillin and all the other, this is a sterile mould that's not used to creating mycotoxins. But more importantly, you're looking at an allergic reaction. This is something different." Anyway, he didn't take any notice. But since then, and I'll finish that and we'll get onto a proper story. I've ended up in hospital with 3 brain bleeds and 2 suspected strokes. And they put me in for an MRI, and I missed the appointment. And when I went back, I said, "Can I have another one?" They said, "You're okay." I said, "Yeah." And I said, "It only lasts about 2 hours, but I wasn't sure what it was, So I could have they could have, my daughter could have had radiation therapy. I could have had a new heart. I could have had, there's so many things I could have cost the NHS and I don't know whether it's my stupidity, and it's certainly not, I want to be okay, but I was just never convinced that. And again, I'll say one more thing about me. 8 years ago, I went to the doctors and said, "My knee's killing me." And he said, "Yeah," he said, "It's complete headache. We need a new knee." And I went away and they made an appointment, and I went back about 3 weeks later. He said, "We're going to book you in a couple of weeks' time." This was 7 or 8 years ago. And I said, "It's okay now. Look, I can bend down and squat. It's okay." And he went, "Oh, good." And that was it. And then 2 years ago, I went to the doctors and said, my right knee's killing me. And they sent me to the doctors. And I wasn't sure whether it was my left or right that I'd gone there before. And I went again, and the doctor said, "No, it's completely buggered. You need a new knee. We'd give you an MRI scan." So I did MRI. And when I went back for the report on the MRI, I said, "It's all right." And the doctor actually got angry with me. He said, you did this to us 8 years ago, where we booked you in for surgery." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, it just shows that it wasn't necessary, was it?" And I'm not sure whether that inflammatory response in my knees is part of my exposure to mould, or whether it's a gluten intolerance. I really don't know, but I'm 75. You'd think I would have known if I've got a gluten intolerance. You'd think I would have known that there's issues going on. But all I'm saying is misdiagnosis, and maybe it's this masquerade that the World Health Organization talks about. So let's talk about this is a current project. So I'm not sure that this is redacted, so I'm going to ask that we don't take notes on names or addresses. Is that okay, Alex?
Yeah. Cool.
So this is a family of 11. It's a mum and dad in their late 30s. They got 9 children. They phoned me up and said, Jeff, would you come and do a survey in my house for mould? And I said, why? And they said, well, 8 of my 9 children are sick, and me and the wife are sick. And I said, you've got 9 kids? He said, yeah. I said, what sort of house do you live in? He said, well, I live in a council house. I said, well, you really don't want to spend your money with me, because the council, I know from experience, will just throw my report in the bin because they don't want to know, and they don't think it's proven. So why bother? I want to broach an issue here because your audience may well be aware of some of the laws. When you rent a home from a local authority or a private landlord, they have a duty to ensure that your home is safe for occupation. Is it occupation or occupying? Occupation. We'll say occupation.
Yeah.
That's a legal requirement. Now, if someone's got mould on their walls, like that little boy Awad, it's an Awad law now. He died from mould exposure, and I want to talk about that. If you remind me, if you make a note and we'll talk about Awad. Ishaq Awad, his name was. The local environmental health officer will come along and do what's called a survey under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. In this rating system, this professional man who has got the authority to evict you or close the house down, he's got a lot of authority, legal authority. He will walk around the property and he will investigate 29 different hazards. They are slip, trip and fall, lead paint, electric services, have stairwells got handrails on at the right height, can someone fall out of a window, lead and mould and asbestos. Now, asbestos is a group 1 hazard and mould is a group 1 hazard. If you get a group 1 hazard, you've got to take some pretty urgent action if you're likely to be exposed. So asbestos sheeting on the ceiling that's painted and not friable, no risk or low risk. But if it's hanging off the ceiling and it's, as you can see, fibres, it's a high risk. With mould, if they can see mould, they'll tell the landlord to paint it and possibly treat it with bleach. Now, the issue is, anybody that knows anything about mould, which would include World Health Organization and possibly NHS, and I'm pretty sure the NHS do say this now, do not put bleach on mould because you can kill it. But the reality is, despite Domestos saying it kills 99.9% of mould and bacteria, that's in a laboratory where they've got the agent, the biological agent, submerged in a clean dish with mould for 20 minutes. Well, no one's going to submerge anything, a house, in bleach. But even if you did and you killed the mould, the fragments of those toxigenic spores become so small that they bypass all human defences. Now, that means that your nose hairs stop 10 micron, ciliary hairs here stop maybe 7.5, 8 micron. Anything less than 7.5 will bypass all human defences, go straight down to the lower respiratory system, alveoli, into the bloodstream. World Health Organization, and this isn't just some body, this is their doctors and research group have said exposure to hyphal fragments is 40-fold higher risk than whole spores because those mycotoxins are going straight into your bloodstream. So along goes these guys. Now, the first thing you're going to be surprised at, guess how long it takes you or anybody else, any delegate that wants to become certified in housing health and safety rating system, how long do you think it takes? 29 hazards.
Ooh, not sure.
2 days.
2 days. Okay.
2 days. I'm an asbestos surveyor as well, and that took me a week's course just to understand asbestos, let alone doing the surveys, which is another week's course. So along they go and they look at mould. Now, if you go into the appendix, which is a guidance document for the use of the housing health and safety rating system, the guidance document actually says not to be used for biological assessments. And I think mould is biological. And you can't see fragments of mould, you can't see spores. All you can see is visible mould. But the stuff that makes people sick isn't what they're looking at, it's what they're breathing in. So this law is being misapplied by every local authority. So when you get a patient come along to you and say, I've got mould in my house, and then you say, well, have you told the landlord? Oh yeah, they brought in the environmental health officer and he said it's okay. Well, him who says it's okay is a fool. And he should be, in my opinion, the authority should be challenged. And what you will also find is the environmental health officer who actually works for the local authority will usually refuse to survey any property belonging to his employer. So it gets even worse. So let's have a look at this man here, and I'll share the screen with this. Okay, got it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so this is the report. There's tons of it, so I won't drive you nuts with all of that. So, right. Information provided by the client. 8 of 9 children display various health issues. Now, I'm saying it often associated with mould and biological exposure. They're under the children are under the care of GPs and hospital. So, you know, everybody's involved. I'm just looking down here, and I'm looking at the tenants. Their 7-month-old baby went into anaphylactic shock. So, you know, just 11 people quite happy in a house. They don't want to move out of the house, by the way, either. So, you know, there's some issues there. Right, information provided by the landlord. He gave a report from a company called Pure Maintenance in 2023. They sampled just one area in the property, which showed 210 Aspergillus penicillin spores against the outside, which was below detection levels. So there's obviously something going on in the house. We'll ignore that bit there. Abnormal and have realised high levels of mould species. So we know that there's some elevated mould in there. So these are my comments on my comments on the testing. The testing was completely inadequate, as only one DNA and one total spore count was taken in the occupied spaces in this 3-bedroom house. Can't reflect any form of accuracy, can it? One spore count. So let's just go through a little bit. And so I start measuring dust. Now here I'm measuring, this is a 6-channel particle counter. And when I look at 0.3 in micron, outside we got 5,403 particles per cubic meter.
Okay.
In the loft we got 8,600. So I'm saying those are the lowest in the whole survey.
Yeah.
I now go into the main bedroom, we jump to 22,000, 18,000. Now immediately you can see that upstairs is more contaminated than downstairs. So this is the ground floor.
Okay.
And as we go along, it's pretty much the same figure. You know, that's an anomaly there, but it's pretty much the same. Upstairs is more contaminated. Now, this picture is quite important. This is called a PIV. Now, this is a positive pressure ventilator that sucks air out of the loft into the house. And just at the bottom of that is a vent that goes into the top landing, so it's blowing air. Now that filter that's wrapped around it only stops 86% of 10 micron.
Okay.
Well, when we look, 10 micron, you know, to put this into perspective, a full stop in a magazine is 60 micron. So when we look at 10 micron, we'll see, I'm not really worried about those. They'll get stuck in your nose anyway, anything that gets through. But look at the 0.3 micron. It'll stop none of that. Absolutely none of that. So anything that's in the loft is going to go into the house. Now, you would immediately say, well, there's not much in the loft, is there? But this has been operating in the loft for a year. And after that was fitted, they took the whole roof off and put a new roof on. This is a brand new roof. So this was pumping all of the contamination that was in the old house, in the old roof rather, into the house. So I would expect the loft to be reasonably clean after be open to the elements for 2 or 3 weeks while they put a new roof on.
Right. Huh.
So we go through the house. I just want you to, I wouldn't normally make a comment about lifestyle. This is a house with 11 people in. Just look how tidy it is. Look how clean it is.
Yeah. Wow.
Look at it. I mean, I go into a single flat and it's not as tidy as it. So look at the left-hand wall, left-hand picture here. And it looks fine, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now I put it under an infrared scan using a commercial, not an amateur camera, but a proper camera. And these are dot and dab. Now these dot and dabs, these are plaster. This is basically plaster, like you plaster a wall with. And these dabs have been thrown onto the wall and then you put the plasterboard up against it. Now the problem here is that outside wall will have a different temperature to the inside wall. So you'll get dew point condensation and you'll get bridging of moisture and temperature. So you'll very likely get mold growth in that cavity.
Okay.
But look at the left-hand picture. There's not a sign of mold in there. But when that mold grows in the cavity, it can permeate through when it's at 0.3 of a micron. Here, I look down here, you can see a shadow, but that's what's actually going. You've got tiny little bits of rising damp. And then I look in here in another room. This dark area is where it's slightly cooler, which normally indicates that it's damp. Doesn't necessarily, it could just be that there's a cold air draft there, but in this case, it's just a little bit damp. Here, this wall had a penetrating moisture leak. The council replastered it and there was nothing to see. Look, there's nothing there. But when I look in infrared, yes, there is. And here, this was a leak. And this was a leak in a ceiling just up here, where you can probably just see an outline there, where there was a leak from a wet room that was above. This house was occupied by an invalid, so they had a steam room in there. It leaked, filled the ceiling cavity with moisture. So the company, Pure Maintenance, blew their product into that ceiling cavity. Well, if you blow 100 litres of air into a cavity, 100 litres of air will come out. But unfortunately, that cavity was contaminated. So they blew out contamination into the rest of the house. More rising damp. This is showing part of a wall which is dry, and then that area that I showed you is showing wet. Confirmed it with a moisture meter, 8.1%, 23%. Now, if that was plasterboard, it shouldn't be over 12%. So this is a plasterboard ceiling, 9.3. That's acceptable. 8.7 at the bottom, acceptable. So here I'm going through, there's no major moisture issues in this house. So I'm simply saying there are no moisture issues in the house. There is no visible mould in the house, but these people are complaining about mould illness. So any reasonable person that didn't know better would say, well, there's not a mould issue, is there? There's no moisture, there's no mould. That's reasonable assumption, isn't it? So I go through and I take environmental conditions. I'm looking at temperature. Look how warm they're keeping the house, nice. Dew point, the dew point is where condensation occurs, all well below the wall temperatures. So humidity ratio is a scientific function between temperature and relative humidity. You can have 100% humidity in the Arctic Circle and it's bone dry. You can have 10% humidity in Death Valley and it's soaking wet, it's like a sauna. So I'm measuring dew point on the wall, that's the temperature of the wall. So I'm saying there's nothing wrong with the house. This is great, nothing wrong with the house. So here's the kids again. So this is just supportive evidence of what my tables and graphs. So now I go up into the loft and I start doing total spore counts. So I'm looking at outside. I usually use ambient outside. I use this as a baseline. 40 spores per cubic metre. There's over 500 and possibly over 999, but they can't count them. There's just too many. Lounge 400, bedroom 193. And again, here, Aspergillus is in bedroom 2, only 40. But again, here, bedroom 3, 320. So you can see, you know, immediately see 320 spores of Aspergillus in bedroom 3, 400 in the lounge and the loft. So there's obviously something going on.
Yeah.
So I've just put it there, made it, just showed what we found. And that's the Aspergillus. So the total spores is only a risk assessment. So we've done a risk assessment and we're saying, well, okay, there's an issue here. So now I'm doing HERTSMI. Now this is the Environmental Relative Mould Index. It was developed in the USA by an environmental hygienist, scientist called Steve Vesper. They went to 1,096 homes and they sampled dust on a Swiffer cloth and analysed it with PCR DNA. And they came up with an average of what the scores were and what species were present in all homes. So this is a breakdown of the moulds that I found, and I'll go through the reports in a second. But here you'll see 100-fold, the double asterisk, Penicillium brevicompactum, Choreophyllium, Penicillium crustosum, Purpureum, all nasty penicillins, and then we go up to Restrictus, 1,000 times higher than it should be, and Aspergillus versicolor, 100 times higher than it should be. So there's something going on. Now this is the actual lab reports. Now here, this report here is 26 of the species that are known to be capable of producing mycotoxins.
Okay.
And here we see those are the 3 that I mentioned. They're at 100 times what they should be. These ones are normal environmental moulds that you will find in the garden. But again, this is 100 times normal than you'd find. So we look at these again. So as we start to go through, these are all different areas that I'm testing. And you'll start to realise all of the figures and numbers seem to be homogeneous. It's the same, pretty much the same species all the way through. Mm. So something's telling me that it's being distributed, which of course is the PIV.
Okay.
So now we're starting to look at the HERTSMI 2. Now this is an environmental assessment of toxigenic species. Now they pick these 5 specific species: Aspergillus paracelloides, versicolor, Catonium, Stachybotrys, and Monomia. These 3 bottom ones are all long-term mould. If you've got those 3, you know you've got long-term mould or water exposure. These 2 we know are potentially toxigenic, but these 2 can create what's called T2 toxin, and they can turn off your immune system. Now, there's a calculation that you can do, and I did the calculation from these scores, taking that from that and then working this out on a loading factor, and we come to a score of 28 in the main bedroom. Well, 10 or below, only 1.7 cases reoccupancy of building, followed by mould immunity, has led to relapse. So what it's saying, if you've got 10 or below, you're probably going to be okay to go back in a building.
Okay.
But 11 to 15, it's borderline, and maybe you should retest again and make sure. Because remember, you're only testing 5 milligrams of dust here. So, you know, you could take 5 milligrams of dust. It's pretty difficult to find 5 milligrams, by the way. But you take it from here or there or another room, you could get different. So we've got 28 there, and it shouldn't be greater than 15. This room, it's 40. This room is 38, 36. 36. So 36 to 40 is, well, you could say 38 is an average, you know, which is quite unusual through a whole house.
Yeah.
So now, what's this one? This is endotoxins. So I'm now looking for gram-negative bacteria, endotoxins. Now, the endotoxins here are quite low. So that's great. I mean, I would normally be concerned when they get over 200. But gram-negative normally come from soil, sewage, black water floods, flooding events. If someone's house gets flooded, those bacteria are likely to be in the house. And even when they've cleared it out, they're still going to be there.
Okay.
So let's go down. So I'm starting to look now at actinos. Now, these are gram-positive bacteria. Now we start to look at these, and I expect you'll recognise some of these. These are ones, these corny bacteria, these are often, these are the scaffolding of mouth bacteria. So this might mean that people are not spitting, but just breathing out or coughing or whatever. So we can see some of these, and we can see that they're at 100 times normal. But these are, and then when there's a P on the side, these double asterisks are 100. When we see a P, we start realising that these are human pathogens. Now, these 3 here, these are cyanobacteria, and these are really, really serious. Again, more cyanobacteria.
Okay.
Now, this is a table on, I'll just pick, let's say that's nodularin there. Nodularin, it's a carcinogen, hepatotoxin, protein phosphate, phosphatate inhibition. So it's really serious. All of those ones that we've got are here. All of those bacteria, gram-positive actinos, are in their house at elevated numbers. So here we go down. That's at 500 times.
Where do those ones come from, Jeff?
Again?
Where do those bacteria come from?
Don't know. Well, these are human habitat, but the cyanobacteria, they're normally only found. This is called next generation sequencing. Up till now, they've only ever been seen on the edges of warm water lakes and seas. Okay. And you used to see people, you get a beautiful orange or blue or green algae form on the edge of the sea or a lake, and people used to gallop their horses through them, and the horse would fall over and die because this stuff was so toxic. But I'm now finding this in people's homes.
Wow.
So this was the pure maintenance report, and it's beautifully written out because it's a major, I'm not saying anything that's wrong here. I'm just pointing out facts. This Pure Maintenance is a massive firm in the USA, and they've come over here and they've got loads of people running around doing what looks like economic decontamination that doesn't work. And, you know, I get so many clients that are worse after they've done this treatment because they're just aggravating everything in the house.
Okay.
So they've done a DNA test here, and they've got in the lounge, they've got an F, which is the highest number. Well, that's enough on its own, isn't it? You know, to say, look, there's major issues here. So this is my favourite. This says after we've left the mould and its byproducts over the course of time, its dwell time, leaving inert matter that will ventilate naturally through doors and windows once we leave. So once we've gone, it's just going to go out the doors and windows, which of course is nonsense, because if it was going to leave, it would have left before they ever got there. So I've decimated this report because not because I don't like them, they're very nice people actually, but because this report has told the local authority that that house is safe for the family to live in, when my report has clearly shown that it's unsafe. So so we're going to come down here, and I just want to show you, this is a couple of the leaks where that wet room was.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Now, when you see a baby like that, how do you feel? And that baby's been treated by NHS for 2 years.
Poor thing.
That's that machine again. And that's the end of that report. So what we've actually got there, that little girl, everything was gone within 4 weeks of moving out the house.
Wow.
So it's just, you know, the mum and dad, you know, immediately, you know, since you know, we've done our report and they've moved out, the mum and dad are, you know, obviously they're very, very happy. And but the local authority have now, when I showed you those reports, when I showed you that lab analysis, I doubt you've seen that type of report before. That's not, you know, it's just because it's not generally available in the UK.
Yeah.
So when somebody sees that and you put it in front of, I mean, I'll name him actually, because I don't see any reason why not to, and I don't think it's anything other than the truth. There is a Professor Malcolm Richardson at Wythenshawe Hospital, NHS Hospital, the Aspergillus Centre. Now, I've got a letter from him and his Elizabeth Johnson, who is the head of Health Protection Agency. I've got a letter from them saying that mould only causes a little bit of respiratory problems, nothing else.
Yeah.
Now, I think the world knows that's not true, but I've got that in writing from them. And Professor Richardson works for insurance companies and goes in and says, oh, it's just us. In fact, the little boy we talked about, Ishak Awad, which is now a law. My camera gone misty again.
Yes, lost focus just a little bit.
Ishak Awad is a little boy that lived in a mouldy house, a mouldy flat, and owned by a local authority. And he died. And the coroner, there was a coroner's report, and they looked at the coroner's report. Now, I read the coroner's report in the Guardian newspaper, so I'm basing my statement now on the Guardian newspaper. And in that report,
That's better.
in that report, it said that Professor Malcolm Richardson was brought in to assess the mould in the flat. So he came in and he said it had been cleaned up, and all I could say was that there was Aspergillus there. And Aspergillus is the most common mould on the planet. Well, I think you've just seen in my report how many toxigenic species there are of Aspergillus and how many normal species there are of Aspergillus. Now, Professor or acting Professor Malcolm Richardson, who doesn't think mould's going to cause any issue other than a bit of respiratory distress, he didn't think that this was an issue. He didn't think to actually analyse what species there was in that flat. He was paid to go to the flat and give a report to the coroner, but he just said it was Aspergillus. Now, of course, it's in conflict to what he does on a day-to-day business when he's working for other people. Now, I'm not making any inference there, but there must be a conflict of interest, and especially when you work in a hospital that deals with people with Aspergillus fumigatus or aspergillosis, and it's such a serious disease. So anyway, that's what that is. And I was going to show you this. When I trained in America, and unusually they thought I was an American. I don't know what I thought. Maybe they thought I was naturalised or something. But I was working with various government agencies in America, and I joined the Homeland Defence, and I got trained in Homeland Defence in the USA. And this is a book that I was issued with. Now in here, the pages are really thick. I don't know if you can see the pages are really thick. It's so you can wear it when you're wearing a chemical biological suit. Well, at the bottom of that page, you'll see Ebola, and I'll show you the top of the page. It says lethality.
Yeah.
So as we come up, we see the bottom is T2 toxin, mycotoxin. Its lethality is moderate, and we just go down a little bit to Ebola, and it's moderate to high.
Right.
So you can see this T2 toxin is used as a weapon of mass destruction, was used by America in Vietnam, was used by Saddam Hussein against the Kurds and killed thousands of people. So everybody knows T2 toxin is a very, very nasty mould or byproduct of mould. But of course, now we've moved on slightly because we're now not just looking at mould. You can see I'm now looking at not just mycotoxins, but gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. I'm also looking at VOCs, and what we've found, or not what I've found, but certainly the researchers found in the United States, is that VOCs, volatile organic compounds or chemicals, actually communicate with bacteria and molds, and they seem to work together in synergy, although they're enemies, but they still seem to work together. And I did a job probably 10 years ago where a local authority asked me to look at a property where they had a tenant that was covered in mould, and I knocked on the door, and this huge West Indian guy opened the door, and as I looked in, I could see black mould 1 metre high all around his flat. And I was just about to turn around and run, and I looked at him and he was smiling, and I said to him, "You're not ill, are you?" He said, "No, man, I'm really, really healthy." But he looked so healthy. And so I went into the home and I looked at the mould. I could see that it was almost certainly going to be Stachybotrys, which is one of the most toxic moulds. I measured the walls. They were all plasterboard. The walls were all 20%, and they shouldn't have been more than 12. And this mould was feasting, but it was so dominant, it didn't need to make the effort to make mycotoxins.
Right, yeah.
So it wasn't aggressive. But what was interesting, of course, was that it was so dominant, nothing else in there lived. So he killed bacteria and everything else. Nothing else. There was no threats in that flat. No. And what I've since read is that some of these molds actually kill bacteria in your body, if you've got them in you. So people can, and I've read somewhere that, people who's got a form of cancer in the stomach, for example, don't get another type of cancer. Is that true?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, so these things are working in synergy, and certainly Dr. Schumacher in his research has started to say, well, mycotoxins might be 12% responsible for inflammatory response, but bacteria could be 43%. So
Okay.
I'll show you something else that will be of interest, I think. I'll show you this.
Jeff, we'll have to finish in just a couple of minutes, just a warning.
Okay. Well, I've got time.
Yeah. You've got time to show this.
Um, and of course, I can't see it. But I was going to show you a brain scan. I expect I'll see it the minute you leave. No. Okay. No, I can't see it. So basically what we're seeing is there are, I feel that most treatments, when people are sick or they may have, the typical symptoms that we know are associated with inflammatory response from buildings, sick buildings or building-related illness, might be irritable bowel syndrome, gynecological issues. Certainly, we've got molds that will cause spontaneous abortion. I've had so many clients that have lost babies and their doctors have said, but you're so healthy, how come? So, what did you do? The brain inflammation, brain fog is a typical symptom that people get. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I walk into at least one divorce a week where either the husband's sick or the wife's sick and they've got chronic fatigue. I'm actually in the middle of writing a paper, just pulling together information that shows that Parkinson's, motor neuron disease, they're all likely to be caused by triggers of inflammatory response, so, and Alzheimer's, dementia. So, I've got a machine in my office that I use a lot because it clears my brain. And I've got a test that's called VCS. You can get this online. It's visual contrast. I forget what the S stands for, but it's VCS. So again?
Visual contrast sensitivity, I think, isn't
I
it?
think that's it, yeah. And it tells you whether one side of the brain is inflamed against the other. And I've done this test and I've seen people do it. And 30 minutes being exposed to clean air from this machine, I can improve my score by 40%.
Wow.
So my brain is still inflamed and, it is what it is. But yeah, I think there's things that if people look, and the problem is a lot of people say, oh no, it's American, it's American, it can't work, or it's salesmanship. You haven't got to look at sales, you've just got to look at results, look at the data. Any report that I give people is data driven, and I say, your home is contaminated or it's got an elevated risk, and you need to reduce that risk as best you can. Yeah. And I think that's about the key.
No, Jeff, I think that's brilliant. And it's given really good insight in regards to what needs to be tested and how you test it. I think that's really helpful for people to understand and hopefully gives them a bit of power and authority when they're looking for someone to do the job. Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges I have with clients is they often think that they can go to a local company and get someone in to do a basic sort of damp assessment or something, and you've shown kind of what needs to be considered ultimately. So I think this is going to be hugely helpful for a lot of people. I'm looking forward to sharing it with everyone.
Well, I'll tell you a funny thing. I challenged the local authority, or I said to the mum and dad in that case I showed you, this report is completely incompetent, and the bottom line is the local authority have been negligent by using an incompetent company. What on earth made them use someone like this? And they came back and said they're Dew Point professionals accredited by City and Guilds.
Right.
So I looked at Dew Point Professional. It's a 2-day course that costs £400. So I wrote to City and Guilds and said to City and Guilds, I did a City and Guilds course in 1966 that took me 3 nights a week at night school and 1 day release to get, and it took me 2 years to get a City and Guilds certificate. This company's doing it in 2 days and you're calling them a professional. What do you think City and Guilds did? Revoked their license. So I've actually got a letter from City and Guilds. They've revoked it. So a lot of this is about people don't know what's going on around them.
Yeah, definitely. Jeff, we're going to have to stop there, I'm afraid. I could talk to you all day. But maybe we'll get you back on and sharing some more of your insight and experience. Thank you so much. I'll let you know when this goes out, and I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Thanks, Alex. Nice to talk to you. Bye-bye.